Welcome to BrandBusters with your hosts, James Schwinn and Sean Lee. Together, we bust open the latest in CPG, retail media, and life, or whatever the we want. And for today's episode, we got something special cooked up for ya. Extra spicy. Take it away, Sean.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of BrandBusters. And we have an amazing guest here today. We have David VanHimbergen, who's the CEO of Real Paper, which is a tree-free, plastic-free paper brand for every home. Currently, Real sells online and has distribution in Target, Fred Meyer, Rally's, and Fresh Time, and several other retailers across the country. I've known David for a while. David worked at Procter Gamble in brand management, and he is an operating partner at Green Park Brands. We're incredibly pumped to have David on the show today, and I think hopefully everybody will learn a lot. I know I'm looking forward to learning a lot from David. So, David, really glad to have you. But the first question I would have is similar to me. You got your start at big CPG at Procter Gamble. What drew you to the CPG or consumer goods startup world and the pain and punishment that comes with it?
Yeah, no, I think first, great to be here. Appreciate you having me. Yeah, what drew me to CPG? So I went to undergrad at the University of Illinois, as many people do, cycled through several majors, started off as a mechanical engineer before ending up in the College of Business and Management Information Systems. So I had this technical degree, but really had much more interest on the business side of things. And, I on campus recruiting event met some guys that were from Procter & Gamble. Really liked what they had to say. And it was kind of, do I go in consulting? Do I go into CPG? And just, learning more about the consumer product space and, how it's known for developing business leaders, the challenge of how do you build a brand and what could sometimes be a commodity category, and create some relevance. But, it's something that your addressable market is nearly every household in the U.S. And so for me, it felt like just that great place. And I didn't know what I wanted to do for a career. So I was like, well, let me go into the CPG world, hopefully learn from some of the best. And then that will be a great foundation for a future career that hopefully evolves into something worthwhile.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then obviously, as I can attest to, being at a big company like Procter doing consumer goods marketing and then leaving and doing the smaller or startup world thing, what kind of sparked your interest to jump out of the big CPG world and jump into the smaller startup game of consumer goods?
Yeah, I think it's, the curiosity and how your career evolves. So when I first started at P&G, like I said, I had more of an IT degree. So I started in the IT function and was supporting corporate finance, but knew that like, hey, if I'm here, known as one of the best brand builders, in the industry, that's what I want to go learn. And so it was very intentional about trying to get over and, what are the new skills and experience I want to develop to continue to get further in my career. And eventually throughout all those different iterations and opportunities, I just found myself in an opportunity where I was working on a new venture for the company. And really, at this point, I was 16, 18 years with the company. So, you're pretty experienced, and you get the opportunity to kind of apply everything you learn, but you get to do so within the, without some of the constraints. And you're far more focused on the external opportunity rather than, I love my experience in big CPG, so I don't want to diminish it at all. But like towards the end, you're doing a lot of internal selling to get things done, which is great practice and experience. But, sometimes I think there's this hunger and desire, like, all right, if the reins were off and I could just go wild, what could it look like? And, in my last experience with the company, I had the opportunity to do so. And that just led to a hunger to want to go out and do that, elsewhere. And think about like, how do I apply my experiences in a new situation, build something from the ground up that could really leave, a legacy and transform categories for the better.
I think that's pretty common, especially if there's anybody listening that works at big CPG, because your experience was similar. You got to go to a new venture and really launch something lean and scrappily within a big company. I did the same with the Zevo brand. And after that, like the thought of going back, to a large brand or spending most of my time managing up and down internally and not actually executing, I was like, I got to go do something small after this. So it was kind of a no-brainer to launch after that.
Yeah,
no,
and it
that's great advice.
transforms like who you are and how you think about things. So my last assignment with the company, I was up here in Chicago working on my own, running this satellite business with other employees that we had hired that weren't legacy P&G employees. And we were 4 people off trying to figure out this new business model. And all the way to the point where I'm going into apartment buildings and drilling lockers into the apartment building. Like that was my role. And like every minute had to be productive. And like, what do you do to kind of advance things forward? And I would still come back, for a short period of time. My wife and family were still in Cincinnati. I was traveling back and forth every week. And then eventually we moved up here and I would travel back occasionally, but you'd walk by some of those larger conference rooms where there are 40 people in there, and it would make me feel uncomfortable to my gut. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many people in that room. That's so much overhead. Are they all adding enough value that you can justify that? So it's just like a mindset shift after that point, which, like you say, you get to a point where it's like, okay, I kind of have this sensation of what's possible, and you feel like you're transformed, and it becomes difficult to go back to that old world.
Yeah, I think with all the different AI features and whether you use Zoom or Microsoft Teams, where it says 5 minutes left in your meeting, I'm surprised we haven't incorporated like an expense or budgetary. This meeting will cost you X, and companies might reevaluate who needs to be attending or whether that meeting needs to transpire whatsoever. But kind of on that topic, on this theme of like big CPG versus like emerging challenger brand. I mean, you worked on some really notable ones like Tide and Crest. What's the innovation process like? So not just working on the legacy products, but what's it like to stand something up completely new within an incumbent brand like that versus, what you're doing with Real today?
Yeah. I mean, all innovation I feel is really satisfying, even back to my early days when you're just launching a line extension on like Crest toothpaste, because the ability to see something that you've worked on for 6 to 12 months finally end up in marketing and you're like, oh my gosh, it's there. Like just this past weekend, my son had a tube of Crest Arctic Fresh toothpaste, 3D white out there. And I was like, who launched that Arctic Fresh flavor? That was me, And so it's just really fulfilling. But I think the difference when you're in kind of a larger company, which I kind of mentioned earlier, is like you're selling in both situations, but your audience is often different. Like when you're working through big CPG, obviously there are a lot of stakeholders involved. It's a huge company with a lot on the line. They need to make sure that they're managing their risk. And so you spend a lot of time trying to bring people along to what your idea is and selling them that this is an opportunity or a risk worth taking. And convincing them this is the right approach, versus I feel like, in the startup world emerging, there are less immediate stakeholders that can be impacted, and it's all about just validating it externally with the market. So, in some cases, it's not always just the customer or consumer marketplace. We have to influence investors and sell them and tell them, hey, we've got a compelling idea here that we believe is worth you putting money into, because someday we think that can be a great return on your investment. But it very much seems more externally focused, and the context is sometimes different too. So like the Tide Spin experience, like I was starting up a totally different business model. So there were certainly folks that had that could be impacted that I had to sell against, but it was new enough that it wasn't going to cannibalize like Tide laundry detergent. So I didn't have to worry about that. In this world, we're kind of a challenger emerging brand trying to exploit the space, but it's an evolution of existing products. I'm not trying to create a new behavior. I'm not developing a new category. This is just what we believe to be a better alternative to the conventional legacy products that are out there that, hundreds of millions of households are using every day.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. from like the challenges of before you probably had a big team, huge consumer research budgets, you may have worked on a product for 18 months, 12 months before it hits market when you're at big CPG. Now you're probably launching things much quicker. You're at least testing them much quicker to see if you can validate them with consumers externally. What was the biggest mindset shift or challenge kind of going from, working on Crest to working on like Tide Spin, which was innovation within a big company with less guardrails, to now, full emerging where you can probably react and test things much quicker? How hard was that transition to get comfortable with it?
I guess for me, it wasn't that difficult. Now, some of that could be a function of just my career path and progression where, like I said, in my big CPG final role or final couple roles there, I was kind of already in that space. So my mindset had started to shift of how do you operate with scarcity? How do you think about, we want to act and operate more entrepreneurially. So how do we mimic that? So I was already starting that. I think once you're finally on the outside, it's just like you said, like you've got to learn to operate with a lot of constrained resources. So, you don't have the luxury of, writing a big brief, doing a huge consumer research project, going off and evaluating different concepts. And some of that is maybe arguably waste that you're getting out of the system. So, when we launch new products now, especially with Real Paper, we are a toilet paper, as you may know, is just a very capital intensive business where, if you control the infrastructure of what produces these products, because it can cost $500 million or more for a tissue making machine, you can kind of control the category. So it's really tough to break into, and that you've got to find the right partners that will give you access to that manufacturing capacity and just to even get in the game. And then if you're talking about innovation improvements, they're justifying that investment and the huge capital resource around productivity and keeping things running 24/7 and limiting changeovers. So if you're introducing a new process into that, that's dilutive to them. So you've got to, again, you're selling, you try to convince them like, yeah, hey, here's what we're trying to do and build here. Here's the traction that we have so far. Ultimately, this is going to be a big opportunity, and you've just got to convince them of that future value that justifies them taking a risk and a gamble on you.
Got it. And as you kind of think about whether it's currently with your experience with like Real, like how do you think about plotting out kind of those pilots? So if you're thinking about like retail expansion, right? You might have some previous buyer relationships that might help you get in the door, but how do you think about like retailer selection and even like store selection to make sure like we can design this to succeed? Obviously, you want it to be as many brick and mortar stores as possible. They're not going to give you full access right away. So what are some tips, tricks for other founders that might be listening in terms of how can we really draw this up for them to take a bet on us and make sure that's a home run for all parties involved?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you've got to be very intentional about choosing your retail partners. And I think the trap you can't fall into is, hey, we want to get in many doors as possible because we want to grow quickly, but you can find yourself in a position where you're scaling something that's broken and not going to work. And it's going to become much more difficult to unravel that and get out of it if you find yourself in that situation. So I'd say, every step should be an assessment of like, what's your confidence level to succeed? And so, we first launched in retail with Target. Target's a great partner. When I was with P&G, I spent 2 years up there in Minneapolis working in our Target business. So I learned how they operate, what they value, what their shopper is looking for, or as they call guests. And so I think, I knew that it would be a great fit there if we got in the door. And, you go through the pitching process, you're convincing them, and then you're deciding on those initial test stores. And we started in 200 stores, which was, a good sample size to validate the proposition with, but something that if it didn't work, we had the time to kind of correct and go from there. And so we've kind of built from that. We expanded to 900, and then this year we're full chain in 1,800 stores with our toilet paper. And so that was a proof point that, okay, in Target, we've demonstrated how this can work. So then as I look at what other channels, and so if you assume all mass is like that, which is not the case, there's nuances across each of those retail partners, but, and Target's great at executing new innovation. And so, I definitely give them praise for that. But, developing into conventional grocery, what does that look like? Okay, well, then you may have a similar shopper because it's just a higher frequency. People may be buying their weekly grocery needs in a grocery store and supplementing with monthly trips to Target. So you may be hitting the same shopper, but it's a different mindset. They're going through the store, probably passing through the paper aisle more quickly. Their shelf space that's dedicated to it is less. It may be tougher or less efficient to get your products on shelf. So there's more cost, and so your shelf price is higher. So you've got to learn like all of the nuances around merchandising. How big is our shelf presence? How important is that? If we don't have a strong presence at shelf, how can we drive discovery and get people into the aisle to let them know that now this retailer is carrying a sustainable paper brand? When they get there, is the pricing right relative to the competitive set, or can you drive closure? So it's all those different iterations and those unknown components of the transaction you're trying to prove out. And so like Fred Meyer, we're in 75 stores in the Northwest, and it's different, and we're learning those things now. But I think as we figure out what works there, then we have more confidence that, okay, we can replicate this across conventional grocery. Here's the kind of shelf presence we need to have to stand out, or you can expect your velocity to be X versus Y. And the more that you can get on the same page with your buyers so that expectations are clear, and you're showing a shared desire to make this a success, because that's the number one thing that they want. Your goals are aligned. You can usually kind of figure out like, okay, we've got some assumptions in place, but we don't know. We're going to be learning on this. We'll continue to monitor results closely, and we'll adjust the plan from there.
No, I think you said a lot of really great things there. And a couple of things I wanted to double click on is when you first got into Target and you did your 200 store tests, how did you align or think about those 200 stores with the buyer? Did they pick them? Did you guys select them together? I know a lot of retailers will kind of break their stores into like tier 1, 2, 3, 4 based on different, locations or zip codes. Did you go on the one like 200 that you thought would be the best for real, or did you pick kind of a variety of stores to see how it would play out and then try to extrapolate that out?
Yeah. So, I think that's the great thing about launching in D2C first is we knew which pockets of the country we had strong sales with.
Yeah.
So we could share that data with them and help them kind of identify what we believe to be the right stores. But at the end of the day, they're working back with their category managers and selecting those. So it ended up aligning very much so with where we were strong, a bias for the coast, larger metro markets, some of their higher performing stores. And that certainly served us well, because we're launching initially and we're expecting, certain velocities, and, things are off to a pretty solid start, but it just keeps climbing month over month. And then like 3 or 4 months in, we're doing 2 to 3 times what the buyer expected in velocity. And
that's great.
They're like, hey, this is great. And, part of that is just the importance of store selection, and getting in those right stores, making sure that you've got the right support plan to drive people in there, to know that the assortment has changed and evolved. And, again, what's the product look like on shelf? Is it easy to find? If it's not, how do you overcome that and get people all the way down to the end of the aisle to see that there's another choice in the set form?
Yeah, no. And I think the other question I had on what you had said, which is great and kind of dovetails in this, is it seems like units per store per week tends to be the measurement that a lot of buyers care about. Obviously, they want velocity off the shelf. When you're thinking about those early tests or going into a new retailer like Fred Meyer, where you have 75 stores, how do you think about your demand plan? Like knowing that you've got 75 stores and probably 75 zip codes that you need to drive velocity for. Do you get pretty targeted around certain marketing or digital efforts to try drive people in, make them aware that it's there, or do you partner more with retail media or, in-store promotions? How do you think about that? Or is it all of the above?
Yeah, it's all the above, and then the mix may shift and change. Probably all of the above would somewhat indicate that we've got a lot of budget that we're putting behind these things, which, again, we have to be selective. We don't have a mass media plan where we're driving brand awareness everywhere. And so, the more targeted and I think closer to the point of purchase where we've seen that be more effective. And so it's a combination of some retail marketing or retail media, some shopper marketing tools. And really, again, it's kind of an iterative test and learn. I think that's a little bit of the challenge in these startup businesses too, is where, you've really constrained if you don't have the capital to put into big marketing, which is, your most discretionary lever to pull back on when capital gets tight or costs surge a bit. Mm-hmm. You lose some of that brand awareness driving component, and you're like, okay, now we have to get by without that and be scrappy. So how do we find those more targeted opportunities to make sure that this is working? And so, yeah, I mean, there's no silver bullet per se. I think it's a mix and trying to just figure out what works and what doesn't.
Got it. And with a lot of brands, especially big CPG, tend to be retail first, maybe e-tail second. I find the trend is with more challenger brands, it's the inverse, leading with kind of e-commerce, marketplaces, D2C. I think Sean and I, we were an Amazon agency prior to this. We actually saw a few trends where these challenger brands are actually trying to leverage their kind of e-commerce sales data to help penetrate new stores and markets. So, hey, for our reason, we have high penetration in this geo, and we think we could kick off a test or a pilot with a certain set of retailers. Any unique findings for you in terms of like whether it be differences in assortment in terms of what's being purchased in store versus online, or just unique findings from, hey, what are people talking about online via customer reviews that, hey, we thought our value prop was this, but consumers are really clinging to this about Real?
Yeah. I think certainly, we'll take that data to say, hey, we've got a really strong consumer base in Northern California around the Bay Area. And that was part of, when we talked to Rayleigh's, we're like, hey, we think we can be really successful here. Here's some of the data that we have. I'd say the differences that we've noticed is I think pricing sensitivity is a little more important in retail. We've kind of learned that through different iterations and experiments. So I think you've got to be pretty mindful of that. And, so going back to the DTC and retail, like you can kind of use the online sales to identify where there might be opportunities, but the way I think, capture those opportunities might be a little different. It's, and again, like, I think it comes back to like, we're still very much in an emerging white space in this category. Like it is in the very early stages. And you've seen, across other personal care categories where there's been a larger focus in development and sustainability, but that just hasn't happened in paper yet because there hasn't been the right assortment or products to deliver on that need for consumers, which we're hopeful that we are there. But with that comes like a huge task of just educating consumers. Like you tell a consumer, hey, we're tree-free products. And they're like, oh, like regular toilet paper is made of trees? Like what? I didn't think about that. Like some people even think like, oh, I thought it was made of cotton or something else. Like I just didn't know. They don't think about that. And they don't think about what impact that could have on the environment and just like, where in some instances there may not be the most efficient logging practices. So you're clear cutting forests and you're damaging ecosystems and it becomes tougher to regenerate there. And those forests that play such a vital role in offsetting all the man-made carbon we're creating, so you start to get into that story and it's intuitive and they follow it and it makes sense, but everyone's just such a creature of habit. Like, okay, I buy toilet paper. This isn't what I always buy. I'm not going to think a lot about this because again, historically, there hasn't been a lot of choices. There's like a range of softness and strengths and price points, but they're all legacy brands that have been around for 30 to 70 years.
Yeah. And probably because they have to spend whatever you said, like hundreds of millions of dollars to buy the equipment, run the lines to make it work. So huge barrier of entry.
Yeah. So the incentives are never really in place for them to innovate significantly, because they're like, I have to pay off this asset over 30 years. And for me to do that and justify it, I'm running it as much as I can with as little changeover and downtime as possible.
With sustainability, I think this is a really interesting category, like value prop, because I think the average consumer wants to do well for the planet, wants to kind of, do their fair share. I think my hypothesis is there might be kind of two apprehensions. One, like, do they want to pay a premium to do that? But then two, like, is the efficacy of the product there? And you guys kind of hit that square on, which I think is a little bit unique. And something I like is, hey, I want to do good for the planet, but I also want to make sure this works just as well, if not better, if I'm going to pay a premium on top of that as well. So how do you kind of battle that bias that the average consumer might have against like sustainable type products, and show like, hey, yes, this is not only is it better for the planet, but this will be a better experience for you as well?
Yeah, and that's really the sweet spot that we focus in on, of, hey, we're offering premium products that are sustainable without a significant trade-off. And historically, where you've had, maybe lower quality products, some of the, private label, recycled fiber, recycled fiber gets processed a lot. It's, and it's so manipulated that it becomes tougher to make high quality tissue out of. And so bringing a different plant source, and bamboo, which is a grass, allows you to use a virgin fiber that regenerates from the same root structure. You don't have to dig it out of the ground, disrupt the land, and create a high quality tissue product. Yeah. So that is like number one, what we have to convince people of is it's not going to feel like sandpaper. It's going to be a high quality, and we use a 3-ply product. So we really deliver that balance of softness and strength consumers expect. And that's been critical, so much to the point of like our original box in Target had a cutout window in it. And what we would find, so you like a little cutout window so you could see, because you're walking down a paper aisle that's usually white rolls wrapped in plastic, and it's just a wall of that. And then all of a sudden you come across this, brown stone colored box, and you're like, okay, this is different, cool. And so we needed to show them like, all right, there are rolls within there. This is a toilet paper product. But because we didn't want to use any plastic, there was no plastic shield in that window. But then consumers would be curious, and they'd reach their fingers and then they'd start ripping apart the wrapping paper around our rolls to feel the tissue.
That's so funny.
And we're like, okay, great. And that's kind of a show and tell at shelf. But unfortunately, they'd leave that product back and buy something else. And so we'd be left there with a product that didn't look great. So we eventually learned that too, to kind of close off the window and try to show the product on the front of the package to deliver the signal of what's this category, how does it fit within all this. But it's certainly, a big consideration for, you're asking someone to leap from something that is a very intimate, comfort focused experience. I don't want to give up and sacrifice a lot of that.
I don't want my the test of the first wipe, right? There's a lot. The stakes are high there. So
it's right.
I think you want to know going into that they're not going to be in a precarious situation. So
people have been burned before. You're on a road trip. You have to go into that gas station bathroom, and you're like, oh yeah. So that's critical, and we try to work through it. But the other thing is, you can drive yourself nuts trying to think through all these and like, how do we overcome it? But, for me, I step back and I'm like, look, we've got tens of thousands of subscriptions online of people that signed up to buy this product. They never felt it. Like, they took a leap of faith. So the more that, you establish your brand expectation out there for consumers and that they're seeing it, then, hopefully you'll overcome it. And I think the more that you convey, like, hey, we're a premium product, this is what we focus in on, certainly trying to get your copy on your packaging right to address any of those barriers, it's critical. So product performance is the other piece. The other one that I think you said, which is critically important, is just the pricing of, there's a big gap in this say versus do around sustainability. Everyone says that they want to be sustainable, but there are limits to where they'll leap off. And that's where I think our understanding around pricing has been so vital of, we can't command a significant premium at this point in time when there's already a significant spread in the category from like a Charmin versus a Scott tissue. So we've got to figure out where we fit in there. We're certainly going to be on the high end, but as a challenger brand, trying to break through to the category where someone's maybe taking a leap of faith of like, I don't know if I'm going to like this product. Like, we can't go to the point where we're 50% higher than the conventional premium brand that set the standard in the category.
Yeah. And that's what, when we launched Zevo at P&G, like that was always the thing, is people first and foremost want the product to work, right? It has to work. Like, otherwise they're not going to pay a premium for any other benefit besides it performs just as well as the brand that they use today, if not better. And then, you can only go so far. Like, people want to do better for the environment, do better for themselves, but there is a limit to pricing. So I think both of those things, for anybody looking at founding a brand, it tends to be around those areas of, can you do something a little bit more environmentally friendly or better for you, that performs just as well as the existing brands. But I think some people listening may go sideways where they're like, I can charge, a 50%, 100% premium to the most expensive brand there. And, oftentimes consumers will push back on that. So you really have to find the right sweet spot of, environmentally friendly product performance and price.
Yeah. And that's kind of the downside to, I think, what prohibits a lot of innovation is where you've got categories that are reliant on scale. To launch something that's new and different, is you're probably not going to have a cost advantage. And so, out of the gate, for you to have a reasonable margin, you may have to charge some premium, and you've just got to understand, can I communicate that value in a compelling enough way that the consumer sees it and they're willing to invest behind that? Because over time, as more legacy companies evolve to adopting that technology, then the cost will ultimately come down and it can be parity. But it's just the downside of being a first mover is a little bit, you don't have that cost advantage. So you've got to figure out, okay, if it's more expensive, how much am I going to have to charge for that? Can I command that premium? Can I communicate in a compelling way where it's not a barrier? Or can I target a unique audience that will resonate for it, to build enough critical mass that I can eventually move into the mainstream and make the proposition work?
What are kind of dovetailing from price? I assume with Amazon and with your website, it's a heavy, bulky product, and shipping is probably a big cost that factors into your pricing. What are some of the challenges of just selling a bulkier product versus a beauty care product that, it costs $4 or $5 to ship? And how have you guys thought about overcoming them with your business model, or ways that you bundle or go to market or think about frequency?
Yeah. It's tough because it's not only bulky, but it's cheap. So it's not like I've got a $70 bottle of cologne that I can sell and put in the $5 mailer. Like, it's $10 to $15 sometimes to ship these bulky goods across the country. So, so you're then the value proposition on, call it DTC or Amazon, is just the convenience aspect of, I don't have to remember to buy it. If I live in a dense metro area where I don't have a car, the last thing that I want to have to do if I go to the grocery store or anywhere is like haul back bulky paper goods. And so the convenience of having it delivered on a regular cadence, setting that frequency and not having to worry about it, is really what the value is for them there. And so, and that is, I think, getting people on a subscription plan where they have full control over what's the frequency of when they need to replenish it based on the size of their household, how much storage capacity they have, has given consumers the flexibility to say, okay, I'm not going to have too much product because my closet in New York City is really small, and I don't want to store a case of TP there when I don't even have place to put my luggage when I'm not traveling. But at the same time, you can flex that based on, if you're a larger family in the suburbs and you're ordering it, you can get it every 4 weeks. And that, having consumers in a subscription just gets the economics of the whole proposition to be much stronger in terms of what lifetime value we're able to achieve. And also that I think going back to the comments earlier around the performance of the product, what we'd said is like, if that product doesn't perform, they're not going to repeat. So you've got to have that great experience to drive the repeat, to justify the extra costs to be able to fulfill within that model.
So, talking about like repeat purchases and kind of driving, I guess, consumer loyalty. I think one of the shifts we're seeing now in kind of the era of influencers and affiliate marketing and Gen Z, how do you think about, especially with your category, like getting your consumers to become brand evangelists? I think there's a competitor, Dude Wipes and Sean Riley, obviously builds this big following. You have a lot of people just like weighing in with kind of the tongue-in-cheek like humor, but it's getting them a lot of exposure through that, just kind of through that niche. How are you kind of capitalizing, you've got a great subscriber base, a lot of people that are already buying in regularly. How are you tapping into that to make them take that extra step to recommend and I guess be a brand ambassador for you guys?
Yeah. It's, for us, the emotion that I think we're trying to evoke with our consumer is that they're proud of the paper that they buy. And so some of the unique aspects about our experience is that, certainly our brand and tone of voice is very choiceful, but, what we talk about a lot is trying to move the category from commodity to care, that they care enough about what materials are used, not only within the product itself, but as it's packaged. And so when you can communicate those values back with your consumer base and do so in a way where it becomes a bit more interactive, I mean, we'll hear all the time of, someone will say, oh, I had a guest over the other weekend and they went into my bathroom and they saw, my rolls of Real wrapped on the back of the toilet. And they're like, oh, what's that fancy toilet paper? So that, because the rolls are individually wrapped, that's unique within this category. And it provides a visual that can spark some curiosity, like, what is this? Why is that different? And on the roll, we tell a little bit about our story of how it's made of bamboo and, saving trees is important. But that becomes kind of a jumping off point to drive a conversation. Like, what is this? Why are you using this product? Where did you find it? Why is that different? And so you're trying to get your consumer base to educate others within their network and spread the message of what we're trying to do. And within our design, we want an aesthetic that feels very clean and modern, that very different from what's in the category today of bright colors with cartoon characters or just swirly old fonts. Something that looks really modern that allows for this next generation of consumers that are like, look, I want to make a difference. I want to do something different from what the prior generations or my parents' generation have, because I know that all of my small choices add up to create a meaningful impact. And buying toilet paper that's plastic free and made from a grass like bamboo may not seem like a lot, but it's a small change that's relatively easy that adds up very quickly and can have a significant impact on the broader marketplace.
That's great. Yeah. So like once you kind of find some of or I guess get your brand users that can evangelize and share it with their friends or kind of people that are close to them in their tribe, how do you think about acquiring customers today? I know we asked this to a lot of different founders, but what tactics or channels are working well for Real today? And what emerging channels are you most excited about or testing right now?
Yeah, we have to be very focused in terms of where our spend is now for where we are. So we do rely heavily on Meta, Google.
Yeah, that's almost everyone we talk to.
TikTok, right? Yeah. So, I think there are things out there though that are very intriguing. I saw a new service that just got some funding from Sequoia and other, I think, big investors that was around customer acquisition at retail that I felt was really compelling. So I reached out to that group just to understand what it is and what a pilot could look like. Because I think it's that, how do you take the the performance-based aspects of digital acquisition and evolve that into retail. I think that's what everyone's hoping and looking
someone's
for.
got to
Kind of get attribution there. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, right? But you just want to have at least a better idea of what's the return on my investments that are going in there. And we're still far away, like I said, from really stepping into mass channels. But the more that I think connected TV can help drive, more targeted ad delivery, that seems really compelling. So eventually, as we continue to scale and grow and our budgets can grow with us, that's something that we can step into. But I think it's largely just, for me, I think it's smaller activation opportunities that are inherently a bit more experiential, that can have a big impact and can kind of radiate and grow from there. And so sometimes that's just what we're looking at. I mean, even, product on the shelf, quite honestly, is a big driver of awareness, of just allowing someone to see you and getting their consideration set of hey, I'm a paper brand, I've been out here. And after a couple times, they might look over and say, okay, well, what is this? Because I've seen it at my friends in their bathroom. Now I see it on the shelf. I've heard about it here. I went to a concert at the Salt Shed in Chicago and I saw that they're using it. So it's I think enough exposures in these small, big, I guess kind of opportunity areas that I think can just start to compound into building something of significance. But I think for now, our marketing mix, like I said, is pretty traditional and just kind of some of the bigger things. And we're still experimenting with some other, Instacart, and it's, and a very interesting acquisition channel for us, because that user's going to tend to fit and overlap with where our shopper demographic's going to be. They're probably looking for new innovation, different items within the category. And they're using that as a service. And so here's an easy way to kind of jump in, meet a consumer that might have interest, and serve them up an ad and win a new shopper.
Great.
And I think as we're kind of wrapping, I would always like to hear which brands are the founders or kind of the CEOs that we're talking to. Who are they tuned into? Who are they monitoring? Who do they think are doing things well? I think we all feel like we're plugged in, but I'm never left, surprised. I'm always surprised when I find out, wait, hold on, who's doing this in that category? So who's someone, whether it be a founder or a certain brand, that you're really impressed with?
Yeah. It's probably an overused one, but Liquid Death, I think, is certainly attention grabbing, just at how quickly they've been able to scale. But, what's certainly, I think they lead with creativity and kind of transforming what would be a relatively dull category. But again, I think if you think about the moments of usage that are extremely relevant, you go to a concert, and I remember this was a couple of years ago, I went to a concert with my wife and we're outdoors, and she's like, oh, I don't want to have a drink or whatever. I was like, oh, you want a Liquid Death? She's like, what is that? I was like, oh, it's just water, but it's in this tall boy can, so it looks like a drink. And she's like, yes, that's perfect, because then people think I'm drinking it.
Yeah. Boring,
but I'm using it, and it's just and it's $7 for a can of water. So you're
that's
like,
wild.
Whoa. So, but they've really, I think, transformed that experience to be you've got more people that are like, I don't want to drink a lot. I'm a mid-40s parent. I want to enjoy the concert, but I know I'm going to be woken up tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. and I've got to run the kids to soccer. So I need to be on my best. And so, but it gives you a can and an experience, you're there enjoying it, and, allows you to still partake in the mood, I guess. So there, and I think there's some others in personal care that have done a good job. Even going back to, Method and Mrs. Myers, Method, which launched in Target as well, of just being a bit disruptive, just the visually different in terms of shape and design, of standing out and saying like, whoa, this is different. And there were a lot of other things that came along with that around sustainability and whatnot. And, using fragrance is really a sensorial cue to drive appeal. And I'd say just more than ever now, it seems like these categories are becoming more fragmented as it's easier to kind of jump in and get into these industries because I can find a way to sell online very easy and transact with consumers. I can acquire them through these different digital media platforms that are very easy to get in. So it has, another trite expression around democratized like products and that you've just seen a lot more entries into these spaces, which is great for the consumer because then there's choice. And that's ultimately what we're after is like, hey, as we talk to retailers, like this is emerging, it's coming, the consumers want the choice. You just need to provide the right assortment, or they may deflect and they'll go to those channels like Amazon that do have a much wider assortment, aren't limited by some physical linear shelf space, and can provide those long tail items that create channel switching behaviors that are difficult to claw back. And I think that's what a lot of these physical traditional brick and mortar retailers are sensing right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's always good to hear what brands you're following. And I think all those are good lessons. David, really appreciate the conversation today. I think I know I've learned a ton. I'm sure James has learned a ton, and I think the listeners will. What we always like to do is for anybody that found this helpful, please share this episode with your friends, your colleagues, anybody else that you think could learn from it. And then we're all pretty nice and open people. So follow us on LinkedIn or send us a request. Follow us on any other social media like Twitter or X. And thanks again for listening. We appreciate everyone's time. And David, thanks for coming on.
You bet. Thank you.